Hello, my name is Dave Head, and this is my story. My story starts, we moved here when I was 9 months old. My dad was a pastor here at a church in the CSRA. I was always raised in church, was there every day that the door was open. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior shortly after my 8th birthday. I grew up, knowing everything about the church, was taught every Bible verse, learned all the Bible verses, and church was a very important part of my upbringing. Being a pastor's son, you learn some things about the church which aren't the best. You learn some of the dark sides to how the church is actually a business. And even though I had a strong foundation of faith in Jesus and knew Jesus as my Savior, I started beginning to questioning some of the things that I'd learned when you see some of your people that you look up to and see some of the downsides. I guess at that time in my life, about my high school years, my faith really started to weaken. When I went to college, that was when I really began to question my faith. As life went on, through college, I kind of began, the disillusionment of my youth in church began to really fester, even get larger. As I, went through life, I kind of distanced myself even further and further away from church because, quite honestly, every time I walked in the doors of a church, I didn't look for what it could do for me or what it could do. I looked for what was wrong with it. And I began to really believe that, Christian faith and churches in general aren't a part of me. Over the next 10 years of my life, not a lot changed. I was, still disillusioned with church. I was still a Christian, but still just didn't have that faith. Over that time period, I met my wife, Linda, who, was very important to me. And we had a relationship. Both of us were Christians, but again, neither one of us really had that faith of the church and faith of what we really needed in our life. Over that time period, I guess it was about 10 years after my faith started to be disillusioned, we had some very big news, and that my mother called one morning and told me that she was diagnosed with cancer. She was my example of Christian. How you live your life, how you react. We used to always say when she walked into a room, she lit up the room with just her smile. I went about, called her every day, wanted to talk to her, find out what she was doing. The thing that amazed me, no matter how much pain she was in or situation, she'd never really discuss it. She would always turn her talks to, well, how are you and Linda doing? Where are y'all going to church? How are things going now? She always wanted to know about my walk with Christ. We knew that we had a short period of time. It really brought the idea of family back into my life, and that's when my wife and I decided to have a child. I remember on Christmas Day of that year, my wife had a miscarriage at that point. She and I were here in this area. Again, both of our families were both gone. We were here by ourselves, and just really realizing how low I was and how I needed something. Something had to be able to pick up my spirits. It couldn't be just this. Shortly after this time, my wife became pregnant with our second child, Sean. Sean was born, and again, that's a good reason. We need to start going back to church. So we'd go to church, and we bounced from this church to that church. I wanted my church. I wanted my faith. I wanted my around there. It's all about, finding the right thing, and it wasn't there. I remember on my son's second birthday, my son was diagnosed with autism. We began to struggle with, we couldn't even go to the grocery store. We were worried about a fit that he'd have in the grocery store and how it would look. We were worried we couldn't go out to eat dinner because you don't know how he's going to do. We went through those next couple months, and it was very tough. My wife, as we were looking around, she started going to True North. She went for probably close to a month or 2 months, and I stayed home with the kids. It was an easy crutch for me. Sean wouldn't like anybody there. Nobody could watch him. He wouldn't go with anybody. We'll be fine. I'll just stay home and watch the kids. Over those 2 months, I noticed a difference. I saw her come home. I saw when we had problems, they weren't as big for her. The true beginning to my reawakening of my faith was the first Sunday I walked in the door at True North. So when we walked into the Journeyland, Sean was still just hiding behind his mother's legs, not wanting to go anywhere different. Well, we walked into doing the new registration and signing them up, and Will Harper was actually standing behind the table. And then amazingly, Sean walks over and he just takes Will's hands and they walk off. And just the whole blind faith of a guy who doesn't know anything about autistic kids would just take his hand and say, this is what's right. It made me realize that all that knowledge that I had didn't matter. It's a matter of just the blind faith of being there to take the hand and walk away. Well, I guess that's now been 2 years, and God's done immeasurable work in my life. Through the struggles that I've gone through there over the last 8 years, it's been some of the most traumatic, life-altering things a person can go through. I mean, a death of a parent, birth of children, finding out that your son is autistic, not to mention the other struggles. We struggle every day. We have issues that come up. Just when I go into work now, people know what I've been through. And when they're able to come up to me and go, how are you dealing with all this? And, it's become easy to say it's through faith, my faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, it makes this easy. I mean, sure, I'm going to struggle with day-to-day things, but when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, what's the problem? Jesus is there. We'll get it taken care of, and tomorrow's another day, and we can do even more for him. I mean, it puts all life in perspective because I can handle everything as long as I have my faith with Jesus Christ.